June, 1889. If a person needed to know what was happening in Sitka, the general store was the center of all news, whether true or gossip. Even so, this time Dalton Lindquist didn't anticipate his family being a part of the tale spewing from Mrs. Putzkukoff's mouth. And yet, to be honest, all of his life there had been a measure of secrecy about his past, mainly because no one was willing to talk about it. Some sort of trouble surrounded his birth or shortly thereafter. That much Dalton knew. His questions made his mother uncomfortable, and his father would admonish him to wait until he was older. Father had once admitted that someone had attempted to take Dalton, and his mother had been wounded in the process, but he wouldn't say anything more. It was Mother's story to tell. "Then it's time she told me," he muttered, stalking down the street. "I deserve to know the truth." It was a good 2-mile walk back home, but Dalton didn't mind. He used the time to clear his head and reconsider what he'd heard Mrs. Putzkukoff say to Arnie, the storekeeper. She had come into the store all excited. Apparently, there had been some untimely deaths in the Tlingit village. A fight of some sort had seen 2 men killed and a woman gravely injured. Mrs. Putzkukoff declared there hadn't been so much trouble since the mess that year Lydia Gray had come to live on the island. Dalton had been standing near the back of the store, looking over a supply of paint, when the conversation had begun. He tried to edge closer without looking obvious, but Arnie knew he was there and hurried to hush Mrs. Putzkukoff. In a town where gossip ruled, Dalton found people particularly close-mouthed about his past. Perhaps it was out of respect to his mother. She was quite beloved and a pillar of the community. Maybe folks felt they owed her their silence. Then again, so many of the folks who lived in Sitka the year Dalton had been born were long gone. The long walk home had done nothing to calm his spirit. If anything, Dalton felt his need for answers only heightened. He longed to know about his birth, about his real father. All he knew for certain was this. His mother had been a widow when she'd come to Sitka, and she had come because her aunt lived on the island. Zerelda Rockford had established herself in this isolated place years before Dalton's mother arrived, and she welcomed her pregnant niece with open arms. Chell Lindquist fell in love with Lydia, and they married shortly before Dalton's birth. The next year, his older half-sister Evie had joined them from Kansas City. When as a child he asked about Evie's husband and why she lived in Alaska instead of wherever her husband resided, Dalton was quickly dismissed with the assurance that it was not necessary for him to know and painful for Evie to discuss. It wasn't until just a few years ago that he'd learned Evie had left her husband because he held her no love and truly hadn't wanted a wife. Still, there were secrets about her life in Kansas City that she refused to speak about, and Dalton was again left on the outside looking in.